I'm delighted to welcome today Dave Myers. Dave is the CEO of the Data Licensing Alliance, and he's going to explain how that is developing and what he sees in the future of data licensing. A very vital issue right at the heart of very many of our businesses.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
I'm delighted to welcome you here, Dave. Now, please give us a little bit of background on yourself and upon DLA, and that will start us off.
Absolutely. So, well, I guess of relevance, I've been in the publishing industry for well over 20 years. I was recruited into the industry by Wolters Kluwer and ran a bunch of different departments for medical research division, specifically Ovid, publisher relations, licensing, business development. I was that legal work for them as well. And about 2007, left and started my consultancy called D Media Associates, which essentially did the same thing for both publishers and for purchasers or subscribers. My work at D Media has kind of evolved more so to the buy side than the sell side. So we represent big multinationals along with very small companies handling the subscription and licensing needs. And then about 5 months ago, started the Data Licensing Alliance, which is a two-sided marketplace for licensing data, primarily for AI machine learning. So at a high level, that's a little bit about me.
Right. That's absolutely fascinating. Now, can I just ask a question off the back of that? And it's this: was it the increasing power and presence of AI in the marketplace that enabled you to come in with this particular alliance, or do you think that data licensing is sufficient unto itself, is important enough?
Well, I'll tell you. So I've been working on this idea for the better part of 5 years, and there are very few things to be thankful for about COVID, but this is one of them. And it allowed me the opportunity to really reassess where the industry is, where the needs are, and where the pain points are. And really, data licensing is just in its infancy, and it will be exploding over the next it's now happening, but it's going to be exponentially more important to the world over the next decade or so.
You've concentrated on scholarly communications, science, medicine, but the generalization you just made, I presume, you would apply to the entire marketplace.
Absolutely. I mean, with Data Licensing Alliance, or DLA as we like to call it, we're focusing on a little small corner of the world. We're taking a page out of Amazon's playbook and focusing on a niche market that I know extremely well, which is STM publishing. But it applies equally to GPS or stock market or financial data, advertising, all sorts of data.
Okay. And when you talk about this exponential growth, how do you see that being expressed? Do you see more and more of your contacts in on the buy side being, what should we say, frustrated by their inability to find the right data on the right terms? Yes.
So absolutely, that is a core component of the rationale for DLA. There's a bunch of problems related to licensing data, and it is a extremely friction business. I'm happy to go into it if you like, but at a high level, the problems is that the publishing industry is a very complicated industry, and licensing data is even more complicated, and it's very non-transparent. There's a lack of trust by the licensees, by the licensors, and in the products. They don't know exactly what to trust, especially in this age of fake news. Using non-optimal data is going to lead to flawed results in people's algorithms. There's multiple needs for multiple data sources, and I can go into that as you need. And more importantly, the data most of the times is incomplete or incomparable or latent. And the world needs it for the algorithms to work. So that's in a very, very high level the issues that I see.
Well, so let's dive under the cover of that in one sense. I'm really interested in the issues of provenance and establishing where the data came from, who owns it, and indeed getting accurate descriptions of it. Is that one of the areas where you see yourselves removing some of the friction?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's not the core rationale for DLA, but certainly having provenance is extremely important. Historically, licensees really want to know where the data is coming from. With DLA, we're looking to have an ecosystem that self-polices the data. But at the end of the day, it's important to know that, especially for scientific data, that lives are at stake because of that the data has been reviewed and trusted and replicated to a certain extent, if possible.
So what are the major areas of friction that you see yourself removing in the trading environment?
Well, if I could tell you, I do deals all day long, year in, year out, for very large corporations and very small ones. And I got to tell you that it's extremely frustrating and slow process. I've been working on a certain deal for the better part of 4 or 5 years that still hasn't come to fruition, if you can imagine that. Yeah. So with DLA, really where we look to the marketplace is really removing pricing negotiations. So the supply side or the licensor sets the pricing. We provide the matchmaking. So in terms of findability and discoverability, we are going much deeper and in the niche so that a big pharmaceutical company can find the data just as easy as a researcher at the University of Saskatchewan. So discoverability is certainly a piece. Ease of transactions. So you find, you buy, you click, and you pay, and the data gets delivered. Just like you would go on Amazon and buy T-shirts. It's as simple as that. And as part of our work, we really want to help educate both sides, because on the supply side, they're very worried about their crown jewels, as you can imagine, right? So if in data licensing, it's not like you have a subscription and you're reading it on somebody's portal. Most of the time, the data is being delivered to a licensee. And so when that data is delivered, there's a trust issue, right? So that's certainly a piece of it that we hope to at least educate the market on. And then on the other side, on the supply side, in terms of purchasing and cost, certain data owners have unrealistic, may I say, understanding of the value of their data. When it comes to machines, and this is going to be my final and one of my main points, is that I think we're at a place where that, if you remember back in the day, there was a big conversation about when data was going from print to digital. All of a sudden, people were giving away the digital to ensure the print, and then at some point, the model got flipped, and it was, you buy the digital and we'll give you the print. We're at an inflection point right now with data licensing, and so we want to educate the market to say there is a difference between what a subscription is and what a license is. So subscription in my mind is somebody reading an article from whatever source. Licensing, for especially for AI purposes, is machine learning to uncover knowledge and information. So those are two different rights subsumed in a piece of data. And suppliers need to understand that there are two different ones and should arguably be charging for both of them.
Yeah. Okay. So we can understand that the licenses could be for very different data reuse purposes. Well, it could be for data mining or for data extraction of one sort or another. And of course, there is the direct machine learning environments that you've mentioned. In these processes, new values are created. Do you get any dispute between parties as to who owns the new values which are created by virtue of these processes?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think what you're referring to is derivative data, right?
Yeah.
So the knowledge graphs or whatever derivative knowledge is extracted from a piece of data, and that's absolutely a huge friction point. In our license, we are clear that the licensor or the supplier owns their raw data in its entirety with all the legal rights around it. But the derivative rights, in other words, the data extracted from that data is owned by the licensee or the buyer.
Mm.
That's our opinion.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
And do you find that suppliers generally come to that view themselves, or are there outposts of rigid resistance?
I would say the latter. So certainly suppliers or licensors are starting to understand that the knowledge extracted is different from the data that they provide, but there is certainly outposts, as you say, that feel that they are entitled to, especially revenue derived from that data mining. And in our opinion, that's slightly unrealistic because all the effort is really on the buy side, on the licensee side.
Yeah.
So yeah, great question.
What other frictions do you feel in this sort of trading?
Oh wow! So again, well, as it relates to data licensing, it's really it's not really complicated. What's complicated is the relationships that we've had over the last, like I said, 20 years doing this work. It's the friction is really in finding the right data to serve a purpose, and finding the right person to grant those rights is a huge piece of friction. So that's a lot where we come in. Other things that I didn't mention, there is formatting issues of the data as one key example. The way it's formatted in standard XML or even PDF, God forbid, or in Word doc, was great for a purpose, but for the machines, it's not great. And it leads to a lot in excess of effort on behalf of the licensee. So that's certainly a huge piece.
And are you building a sort of index here? I can imagine an index in which a data item might say, this is in a difficult format which will cost you to access, or this has a bias warning notice, or this has unknown provenance or unsatisfactory provenance. Are you building a sort of index of data, or is that a sort of part of the buyer-seller relationship?
Well, so if I may kind of answer that in a slightly indirect way, on our marketplace, we are clearly identifying the provenance of a certain set of data and all the attributes thereof. So, it goes with the supplier, the size, the format. We even allow for downloading of samples. So not necessarily an index of the exact data, but certainly with our search technology, we and the underlying thesauri, we certainly are providing generous discoverability of data.
Right.
Shall I say.
Okay. Okay. Now, I'd like to turn to the future. These are FutureScapes, and I think an element of what we're trying to do here is to, if not forecast, is at least to look at the future a little bit. So, take a strategic time gap. Traditionally 5 years, but any number of years that you like below 5. How do you see this market developing? Obviously, by launching this alliance, you can see the need to bring buyer and seller together and to remove those frictions. But how do you see this scaling? And do you see a day when these deals will be machine-to-machine deals made by machines interacting with your indexation and offering?
Great question. I'll answer the last question first. I see a future, certainly maybe not in the next 5 years, where it's completely machine-to-machine, but certainly more than it is today. As we start off with DLA, a key component of it is the consultancy or services piece of it, because there is going to be bespoke needs by bespoke buyers or sellers, licensees, licensors, that are going to need to be handled by humans. But we hope, as the data is quote unquote freed from its silos, and people understand that there's appropriate DRM or other types of safeguards, that they can be further free to let the data find its own place. So if I may, kind of walk you through a little bit of how I see the future. In thinking about it, I was doing a fair amount of research and thinking about it, and I was drawn, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your view, to the Matrix movies, right? And they were very telling. In the Matrix, they say, I quote, I think it's, I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how it's going to end, but I'm going to tell you how it's going to begin. And I think that's really, this is really the beginning. So you either going to believe that this is a valuable service and data is going to be the future, or it's going to be humans and the interaction that it used to be. And I feel strongly it's certainly the former. So we're really living now in a data economy or era, depending on who you listen to. Some people say the data is the new oil, but I think they're wrong. I think it's going to be much more valuable. Data is really shaping the future of humanity. So you talked about the industry, but we're really there's multiple. I mean, every industry will be impacted with artificial intelligence and data licensing. Really, our focus, as I mentioned, is STM or STEM content. And I think, Accenture said it best, is that, AI and data are becoming the new operating system in health. And I think they are going to be artificial intelligence is going to be the catalyst to aid in mitigating informational and business problems, especially in healthcare, which is really going to be the focus of the STEM data licensing efforts on our behalf. It's going to be the key to rapidly scale automation and solve, supply constrained industry issues. in the future, I see a world, let me say from the buy side, which is really, I think, the interesting thing. There is a nascent but tsunami-like movement and understanding that data owners and companies are sitting on treasure troves of data, and they don't really, they're starting to understand that they can do something with it themselves, but really that data itself they can monetize in various ways. From buying data, they're realizing that they have their own data that they can utilize, and realize that data, once anonymized or scrubbed, can be sold for additional revenue streams. And really, it's that unleashing, as I said, of data that will really revolutionize the world, because algorithms need the data to train and use in prediction and all the other kind of analytics. And once that data is freed from its silos, that's we're going to have an exponential growth in the world. And that's kind of my 2025 plus view of the world.
Thank you, Dave, very much indeed. Look, that's I think a vision which many of us can accord with, but few of us are in a position to do very much about it. You have the tiger of the future by the tail here, and I think it's going to be a very exciting ride for everybody who is trading, licensing, developing data exchange across the industrial base in any possible sector. Dave Morris, I've been delighted to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being with us, and for contributing your thoughts and ideas to FutureScapes.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.